It was a gray morning in Pretoria, the kind of morning that carries a heavy sky, not yet raining, but waiting, the kind of sky that holds its breath. Hundreds gathered at Freedom Square, an open space framed by the towering buildings of government, the shadows of the past, and the hopeful banners of a future not yet realized. Cameras clicked. Reporters rehearsed their intros. Security agents stood at full attention. On the elevated stage, draped in national flags, President Cyril Ramaphosa stepped up to the podium. He adjusted his jacket, cleared his throat, looked out over the sea of faces, some expectant, some exhausted, all watching. Behind him stood ministers. In front of him, microphones. It was supposed to be another official announcement, a new program to address poverty and unemployment. Another speech, another promise. No one knew this would become a moment the nation would never forget. Ramaphosa spoke with the practiced rhythm of a seasoned leader. Our commitment to restoring dignity begins today. He spoke of reforms, initiatives, plans. The words were clear, rehearsed, safe. Then something shifted. At the edge of the crowd, security agents turned sharply. There, slipping through the barrier, was a man. No media pass, no shoes. A worn-out blanket clung to his shoulders. His beard was overgrown, his jeans torn, his face darkened by sun and soot. But his eyes were sharp, alive. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He just walked, slowly, deliberately, straight toward the stage. Gasps rippled through the audience. One guard stepped forward, but paused. Something in a man's posture, not aggressive, not unstable, made everyone stop. Ramaphosa noticed. His speech halted mid-sentence. He turned and locked eyes with the man. Silence fell like a curtain. The man stopped just below the steps to the stage. He looked up, not pleading, not demanding, just present. His voice came out dry, raspy but calm. "May I speak?" he asked. Security held their breath. The president took one slow step forward. He motioned for the man to come closer. The crowd murmured, confused, shocked. And then, in a gesture that stunned even his own advisors, Ramaphosa handed him the microphone. The man took it, hands trembling. He looked out at the crowd, blinking against the lights and the stairs. And then he spoke, not with anger, but with something far more powerful. "Mr. President, if I die tonight on these streets, will anyone remember my name? Will anyone even care I was here?" And just like that, time stopped. No more camera clicks. No more coughing. No more political lines. Just a question that pierced the silence like a blade through cloth. The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire that no one wanted to admit existed. If I die tonight, will anyone remember my name? For a moment, the world forgot how to react. The security team stood frozen, radios buzzing faintly at their hips. The ministers behind the president shifted uncomfortably. The press lowered their cameras, unsure if they were witnessing a breakdown or a breakthrough. The wind moved softly across the square. Children stopped fidgeting. An old woman in the front row clasped her hands to her chest. Ramaphosa didn't speak. He didn't move. He just listened. Because sometimes, when truth is spoken plainly, the only response is silence. And in that silence, something holy began to form. Not religious, but sacred, human, undeniable. Then, slowly, Ramaphosa stepped down from the podium. He didn't wave security forward. He didn't signal his team. He walked, alone, toward the man who had no title, no power, no home, only a voice. And when he reached him, he opened his arms and embraced him. Not a political gesture, not a performance, but a real, unfiltered human act. One soul holding another. You could hear the sobs in the crowd. Not from the man, from those watching. Because something had cracked open. Something long ignored. After a long moment, Ramaphosa turned back to the microphone. His voice wasn't polished. It trembled. If you're asking whether anyone cares, they do now. Because today, all of South Africa will know your name. And starting now, we will do more than remember. We will act. No applause. Not yet. Only tears. By sundown, the video had already been shared across every corner of the internet. No music. No edits. Just a homeless man and a question. Will anyone remember my name? Thabo Ndlovu. That was his name. A father. Once a city bus driver. Once a husband. Now a statistic until that morning. News channels played the moment on loop. Talk shows debated it. Social media exploded. Some called it staged. Others called it the most honest thing they'd ever seen. But one thing was certain, South Africa had changed that day. And at the center of it was not a politician, not a policy, but a man with no shoes, who had finally been heard. By the next morning, something rare had begun to unfold. A reaction not of denial, but of response. President Ramaphosa called an emergency cabinet session. No press, no speeches, just one item on the agenda. What happens when the people we fail speak back? A special task force was formed, one that would include not just politicians or bureaucrats, but someone who had lived the system from the gutter upward. Thabo Ndlovu was invited, not as a guest, not as a photo op, but as a voice. He was given a suit, a shower, a hot meal, but more than that, he was given something that years of concrete, cold nights and silence had stolen from him. Dignity. That night, Thabo lay in a clean bed. He stared at the ceiling in disbelief. The sheets smelled like lavender. The lights were soft, and for the first time in over a decade, he didn't fall asleep from exhaustion. He fell asleep in peace. Days passed, but the moment would not fade. Thabo sat alone one morning at a public desk in a community office. In front of him, a blank page. Beside him, the memories of everything he had been through. And then, with a borrowed pen and hands still trembling, he wrote, I didn't interrupt the president because I was angry. I interrupted him because I was invisible. And because hope begins with being seen. Because asking a question out loud is the first step to being human again. That handwritten letter was scanned, posted online, and it spread like wildfire. Veterans wrote in, single mothers, youth stuck in drug centers, even politicians. Thousands of comments, reposts, tears. The letter had no fancy words, just truth, and that was enough. 3 months later, in a quiet shelter on the outskirts of Johannesburg, Thabo was no longer a resident. He was staff. Every morning, he handed out bread and coffee. Every evening, he listened to stories that sounded like echoes of his own. And then, on a Wednesday morning filled with sun and dry wind, 2 figures stood at the entrance. It was his children. They hadn't seen him in 6 years. They were taller now, older, quiet. Thabo stepped forward slowly, hands shaking for a new reason now. His son spoke first. We saw the video, Dad. We read your letter. We didn't know you were still you. Thabo didn't answer right away. He just pulled them both into his arms. And for the first time in over half a decade, he cried not from hunger, not from loss, but from healing. Later, someone at the shelter asked him, how did it all begin? Thabo smiled through wet eyes. It began with a question, and with a hand that chose not to push me away. In the months that followed, Thabo Ndlovu's name stopped being just a headline. It became a movement, a symbol, a seed that grew roots deep into the cracks of a broken system. The government launched the Ndlovu Initiative, a national program designed not by officials in offices, but by those who had once slept beneath bridges. Thabo wasn't a guest speaker. He was on the board. He walked through shelters, not with pity, but with presence. He looked men in the eyes and said, you are not invisible, not anymore. And something strange happened. People started listening. Former addicts became counselors. Unemployed fathers became volunteers. Women who had stopped speaking began to sing again. And every time someone asked President Ramaphosa how change had begun, he gave the same answer. Never underestimate the power of one voice, especially the one we've ignored the longest. 1 year later, no cameras, no microphones, just the early morning sun crawling over the skyline of Soweto. Thabo stood alone in a small field behind the shelter he helped build. The air was still, the earth soft beneath his bare feet. In his hands, a folded blanket, the same one he wore the day he interrupted a president. He knelt and laid it gently on the ground. Then he stood back straight, hand to brow, and he saluted the South African flag as it rose slowly over the shelter's roof. and he saluted the South African flag as it rose slowly over the shelter's roof. Not out of nationalism, not for tradition, but for memory, for the man he used to be, for the names still waiting to be remembered, and for a promise fulfilled. Some stories end in applause, others in silence. But this one ends with truth. Not the kind printed in newspapers, not the kind recited in speeches, but the truth whispered between brothers on the street, between a father and a child, between a man and his country. Thabo never wanted to be famous. He wanted to be heard, and in being heard, he gave voice to thousands who still sleep in doorways and shadows. Today, his name lives not on statues, but in the mouth of every child who dares to ask, "Will anyone remember me?" And now, the answer is simple. Yes, we will.